slow down a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get used to this screen. Do we have a chat? Yeah, open chat. So you could even send me a note that says slow down.
Okay.
Or you can say slow down. Either one will work for me.
Okay.
So is the tempo at which we've been talking about reasonable?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
So does everybody see it if I raise my hand?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to raise my hand. I want to unraise it here. Let me lower my hand.
Lower my hand.
Did it go down? It went down. I'm just playing with this until Darren decides he's ready. Did that say somebody was kicked out already?
Oh no, just
Go ahead.
no, just me. I just kicked out my.
All right, people, we're live. We're live on YouTube. We're starting, I guess. Dorian, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
All right. Okay. We are on YouTube and live. Can you confirm? Gauhar or?
Can't hear you, Doran.
Okay, great. So we start. Good day, all the participants. This is a space initiative. My name is Doran Albuquerque, and our goal is to contribute to the development of space industry, people in tech, science, and innovation. It's a pleasure to introduce Charles Bolden, an astronaut and a former NASA administrator from 2009 to 2017. And a person.
Are you hearing him, Den?
Do you hear me? Do you hear me, people?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Charles Bolden is a
I'm
person
not
with
hearing
a.
Doran.
Oh, really?
I think you might have.
Do you hear me?
I'm hearing everybody else. I just don't hear him. Gokar,
Medina,
are
do you
you
hear
hearing
me?
him? You able to interpret?
Yes, I hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can interpret. Yes.
Yeah, we will can hear you, Dorian.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean,
Charles-
you can hear him?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I could hear Dorian as well.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
I'm not getting him at all. I'm getting his video, but not his audio.
Okay, I will continue. Maybe it will be better. So Charles Bolden is a person with a kind heart. We invited Charles to speak with the young people and professionals to share his exciting experience and perspectives. Charles, do you hear me?
It doesn't seem so, Dorian. How about you go out and come back to the room right now?
Okay.
And Den, are you the backup in case Doran his audio doesn't work?
Yes, I am.
Good.
We'll try and see how it goes right now, and if he doesn't join very soon, I'll take part.
Okay.
Dorian, please unmute yourself again. We can hear you.
Do you hear me? Do you see me? Charles?
No.
Mr. Bolden? No? Charles, do you hear me? Do you listen?
Can you hear him, Mr. Bolden?
I can't hear him. Can he hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, he can hear you, but Mr. Bolden cannot hear Dorian. All right, Dorian, how about we do the following? Dorian, are you here?
Okay, I'm here again. Do you hear me,
Mr. Bolden, can you hear Dorian?
No, I
Mr.
can't.
Bolden? Okay,
I'm here.
Dimash, you start.
I
Dimash,
just
you
don't
start.
hear him for some reason, but why don't we
Yeah,
go
all
ahead
right.
and let
Yeah, Dimash.
All right.
All right, let's go ahead. I'll take over. So,
Yeah.
again, sorry to everyone for our slight technical issues here. And we're starting our live talk with Mr. Charles Bolden now, who, as you have might read from the introduction, has taken part in 4 space shuttle missions and has been NASA administrator for, I think, 10 years, is it? And yeah, Mr. Bolden, why don't you introduce yourself better than I can?
Hello to everyone. My name is Charlie Bolden, and as Den was saying, I'm a former NASA astronaut, and I served for both terms of President Obama's administration as President of the United States as the NASA administrator. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today with all of you, and hopefully I will get an opportunity to answer as many questions as I can. Before I go back to Den and let him take charge, I wanted to introduce everybody to a new friend of mine. I'm not sure if everybody can see this, but in case she's looking, her name is Asisa, and she's a 13-year-old young lady from Kazakhstan who wants to be an astronaut, and she asked me a question that I wanted to
Mr. Bolden, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we can't really hear you very well. Your voice sounds very silent right now. Can you do anything about it?
How about now? Is that better?
No, it's not much better.
Ooh, we're not having a good day, are we?
No,
Oh, it's good now. It's better now.
Now it's good.
Okay.
It's pretty good.
Okay. I was talking about Asisa, the young lady, and I was going to answer her question first and then let you go back and ask the other questions, Dan, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Asisa asked about how does the young lady, particularly someone from Kazakhstan, become an astronaut? And I was going to say she's already well on her way. She's very proficient in 4 languages, and she has a plan. And I would say study really hard, work hard, never be afraid of failure. And she doesn't seem to be that way anyway. But I would recommend a book for her, and that book is called Handprints on Hubble, like handprints on Hubble, the Hubble Space Telescope. It's written by my crewmate from the Hubble Space Telescope mission, and we're celebrating our 30th anniversary today of the deployment of Hubble. But Dr. Kathy Sullivan wrote the book, and it's sort of an autobiographical sketch, but she also talks about all of the people around the world who were involved in building and making and launching and operating the Hubble Space Telescope. So Isisa, if you're listening and you have an opportunity, try to get the book Handprints on Hubble, and Dr. Kathy Sullivan has some really good pointers on how to overcome adversity and become an astronaut. Back to you, Dan.
All right, thank you very much. So for the viewers, I will briefly explain the format. I will hand over to each of the speakers. The speaker will briefly introduce themselves and then ask up to 2 questions. And if we have time at the end, we'll move on to the questions from us. We have more questions than 2 from person. And at the very end, we'll ask some questions from the audience, which keep coming in our live stream chat function. So we first start with Yerasil. Yerasil, would you please introduce yourself and start off?
Yerasil, are you here?
All right, we cannot reach Yerasil. Why don't we move to Medina right now?
Hello, everybody. Mr. Charles Bolden. I'm very glad to meet you. My name is Medina Kalel. I have 2-year experience in space industry as operator of Kazakhstan Science and Technology satellite, Kazakhstan, and as a beginning systems engineer.
Then, unfortunately, I'm not hearing Medina, but is she asking any of the questions that were sent to me earlier?
She's just introducing herself. I'll repeat her question to you once she's done with it.
Do you hear? No? Okay.
I can hear you, Medina, so please go on. I'll just forward the question.
Okay. I'm a beginning systems engineer in Galam LLP. It's a joint venture of Kazakhstan Garage Sapare and Airbus Defense and Space. My question is, today, fighting COVID-19, many people are faced with psychological problems of self-isolation. So speaking of long-distance space flights, how do you think future astronauts should overcome the difficulties of isolation in a limited space in long-distance flights to Mars?
All right, I'll try doing my best in repeating that kind of long question. So today, during the days of COVID-19 and quarantine and self-isolation, many people are facing psychological issues of being alone. And how do astronauts, in the context of long-time space flights to Mars or to any other destinations, deal with the isolation, and how do they overcome what they do?
Medina, your question is an excellent one, and we think about this quite a bit, and I'm not sure that we have an answer right now. We try to simulate the biggest thing that contributes to isolation for a crew, we think, is going to contribute to isolation for a crew on a long-term space trip like going to Mars, is the fact that the farther away from Earth you get, the longer it's going to take for a communication transmission to get from Earth or the moon to the crew that's on the spacecraft. Could be as much as 7 minutes. And so today, when the crews train on the International Space Station, we actually put time delays in such that they're having to deal with longer and longer periods of communication transmission delay. The question you asked is something you added in that it's a psychological factor, and that's one of the things that I'm not certain we have given sufficient consideration to, because if you think about going on a trip to Mars and about a week out, you look back at planet Earth and it's a little speck, and you also realize that it's going to take minutes for your voice to get back to your loved ones on Earth. I'm not sure that psychologically we know exactly how a person is going to deal with that. I don't know that we have a way to train for that. So it's a challenge. NASA's and our partners in ESA and Roscosmos and the Japanese Space Agency and the European Space Agency are all working on right now, but I'm not sure we have a solution yet.
Okay. Thanks for your answer. My next question is, as widely known, NASA helped SpaceX in the development of Falcon rockets. Now, Kazakhstan government wants to attract startups to space industry. As former NASA administrator, could you please advise what is the best to do? Share technologies and then organize a space venture fund, incubator, or something else?
All right. So, could you now, Kazakhstan? I unfortunately kind of misheard the first part of the question.
I can send it in a chat.
Oh yeah, that would be good, I guess. Mr. Bolden, you can see the message, the Medina's question in the chat. Mr. Bolden, you're muted.
Mr. Bolden, do you hear me?
I now hear you, Doran. And unfortunately,
great.
Yeah, Medina's question Here we go. Medina, your question that you just asked is actually similar, very similar to what Arman, who is also, I think, on the line. He's one of the professors. Let me try to.
We have.
Let me try to answer the question for you, because when NASA decided we were going to go with commercial capability to provide transportation from Earth to low Earth orbit, and we had companies such as SpaceX, a company called Orbital, that later became Orbital ATK. Today is actually, is that Aziza?
Yeah,
screen?
here's Aziza.
Yeah, hi Aziza, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? And
Doing very
I'm really thankful for your recommendation about the book.
fantastic.
Aziza, can you distance your camera? Yeah, it's better.
And I'll go back to Medina's question. You know, in Kazakhstan, what NASA found was most of our international partners were not very familiar culturally. They were not very familiar with what we call commercial space. NASA uses private industry to do the construction of almost everything we have. We do build satellites because we have people who are really brilliant engineers. But for launch vehicles, NASA never built launch vehicles. We always went to the private sector to have the launch vehicle built. And then we bought it and we owned it and we operated it. The big difference today with what we call commercial space is that we have gone out to companies like SpaceX. We invested in an additional amount with them, and in American dollars, it was $500 million to SpaceX, and it ended up being Orbital ATK that also got $500 million, and they had to match that or put in as much as necessary to design and build their own launch vehicles and cargo vessels. And so that's the way that we helped get SpaceX started, and we helped to push Orbital along. And I would say if Kazakhstan has a way to do the same thing with Kazakh industry, that would be the best way for them to get into a commercial type of space operations, where it's not owned by the government, but it's owned by the private sector, and the government then purchases a service from the private sector.
Aziza, it's too close to your face, Aziza, your phone. Это слишком близко телефон к тебе. Чуть-чуть подальше, Азиз. Do you want to say something to Mr. Bolden, Aziza? Yeah, can you introduce yourself? Aziza, can you introduce yourself?
Disconnected.
I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you introduce yourself, Aziza, please?
My name is Aziza. I'm 15 years old. I'm from Kazakhstan, and I have a few questions to Charles Bolden. My first question is, what if his children tell him that they can become an astronaut? What is his feeling?
Well, as you and I were talking a little bit earlier, three things that I always tell a student or anybody who is interested in becoming an astronaut. One is study really, really hard, and you seem to already be doing that. Believe it or not, you speak 3 more languages than I do. I only speak English, so you're well ahead of me there. In your studies, I would say make sure you study math and sciences, but also study the language arts, and it seems like you're really doing that so that you can communicate your ideas intelligently among the people on the teams with which you're going to work. Work really hard at achieving your goals. And then the final thing that you already seem to understand is don't ever be afraid of failure. Be a risk taker. Take chances on things. Don't listen to anyone who tells you you can't do something or you don't belong. You do belong, and you can do almost anything you want to if you set your mind to it and you're willing to study and work really hard. And can you repeat your second question? I didn't quite understand it.
Second question is, what inspired you to become?
Oh, I never dreamed of being an astronaut, Asisa, growing up. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. And when I was growing up, many, many years ago, in the South, we lived under what was called segregation. So whites and blacks didn't live together, didn't go to school together or anything. So my school didn't have a lot of the subjects that the white schools had. And so I didn't have anybody that looked like me who was an astronaut. So I never dreamed of being an astronaut. But I did see a television program about the Naval Academy. And so I decided that's where I wanted to go to college. So that was the beginning of my inspiration to get where I am today. I did go to the Naval Academy, came into the Marine Corps, became a pilot, and then later a test pilot. And I met a person who was my inspiration, Dr. Ron McNair. Ron had grown up in South Carolina just as I had, was also African-American. But unlike me, he didn't take no for an answer. He wanted to be an astronaut, and he really pushed himself to do that. And he went to a pretty impressive college in the United States called Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. And he earned a doctorate degree, the highest level of educational degree in laser physics, and became a prominent laser physicist, was a 5th degree black belt in karate, and was a very accomplished jazz musician. So a very well-rounded person. I met him, and he asked me if I was going to apply for the space program. I told him not on your life. And he looked at me and said, why not? I said, they'll never pick me. And he looked at me and he said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't ask? So my answer to you is ask for anything you want. Be sure you don't accept no for an answer. So Ron McNair was my biggest inspiration for getting into the space program.
Great. So the next, who will be the next?
Supposed to be Rasul.
Rasul, if you hear us, please rejoin the conference. Bayjan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Rasul, go ahead.
Yeah. Bayjan? Bolden, communicate.
I don't hear him, but if you'll do like Den, just since you can hear him, if you can repeat the question, then I'll try to answer.
What's your question, Bayjan?
Mr. Bolden, can you hear me? Okay. First of all, it's an honor to talk to you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Bayjan. I'm a senior at National School of Physics and Maths here in Nur-Sultan. I'm very interested in space and physics, so I've been participating in physics competitions, and also I've graduated from United Space School last summer. Let's move to my questions. My first question is...
Dimash, please represent Bayjan, because Dimash, you know better Bayjan than I know him.
He can hear me. My first question is, now, should we explore space and colonize planets, or would it be better to take a lot more years to invest and develop space infrastructure here on Earth, and which could be make it easier in the future?
Bayjan, I think it's now time for humans to venture to try to catch up with our robotic explorers. we actually have been exploring Mars now for 50 some odd years with robotic spacecraft. We've had rovers and landers and orbiting observers, the same thing with most of the planets in the solar system. And so I think it's actually time for humans to venture out and try to follow up on the work that the robotic explorers have done. One of the biggest questions we have is there life elsewhere in the universe? We believe that there may be life on places like Mars or on some of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. Mars is the one place that seems to be hospitable in some limited way to human beings. And so we've chosen Mars as the likely place to go. And it's my belief and my hope that in the next decade, in the decade of the 30s, we'll actually have the technical know-how to send humans to Mars and have them survive and live there for long periods of time. I'm not a believer in colonization, you know, where humanity moves off planet Earth to some other planet. That's not what I want to do, but I do believe it's imperative that we move to other planets to explore, see how much we can learn about that helps us understand our own planet better, and to make our own planet better, to clean it up and make it a place in which we can safely live.
Okay, thank you. Well, my next question is, how did it feel like sending the very first human voice message to Mars?
You know, interesting, Bajan. The way we did it was I recorded my voice, and then we transmitted it the 7 minutes to the Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars. And then actually Curiosity played my voice back. So it was, the message was far too long. So I don't even remember what I said back then. But I think the intent of the message was to let people around the world know that, you know, we, NASA in the United States and our partners on the Curiosity rover were there for peaceful purposes, and that it was our hope that humans would one day follow Curiosity to the surface of Mars, and we would find ways to make life better for people back here on Earth with the discoveries that we make on Mars.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bolden.
Darn, are you there? You have the next question?
No, that's it.
Oh, I think Dimash, I think you can change Darren right now.
All right, so next turn is Sergey. Is Sergey here?
No.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Mr. Bolden, can you hear Sergey?
Yes, I can, sir. Sergey, I saw you. I don't know whether I heard you or not, but
good morning, dear participants,
I
Mr.
don't
Bolden.
hear you, but go ahead and ask your question, and they'll relay it to me. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Present yourself, please. Yeah, we do hear you.
Okay. So, dear Mr. Bolden, I'm Sergey. My name is Sergey Prokudin. I'm lead design engineer at Galam joint venture company and responsible for the thermal and radiation analysis of spacecraft. So, having approximately 13 years of aerospace experience, I would like to ask you some questions, and thank you, the hosts, for such possibility to express my question for such a prominent person. The first one question is, Mr. Bolden, on your own opinion, what kind of NASA ongoing currently projects are most perspective in terms of the common human good?
All right, let me forward that question, because unfortunately the introduction was quite long, and I cannot really repeat. But the question was, Mr. Bolden, in your own opinion, which of the currently ongoing NASA projects is the best for human good?
Sergey, thank you very much for the question. And believe it or not, I have your biographical information, so I do know about you. Interestingly, I think personally that NASA's #1 project right now for the benefit of humanity is a program called SERVIR. And I'll spell it for you. It's SERVIR, SERVIR. And it's a program that we run jointly with the U.S. Agency for International Development. We have 4 sites around the globe. The one that would be most closely associated with your region of the world is SERVIR Himalayas. And the project collects real-time Earth science data from orbiting satellites and airplanes and everything. And it helps people around the world with water resources management, with crop development, disaster planning and relief, and just trying to make the world a better place for all of humanity. It understands that one of the biggest challenges for humans upcoming will be food security. And so the program allows us to work with countries around the world in trying to ensure that there will be food and water for people a generation from now. So that's the program that I think NASA has that has the most indelible impact on humanity right now.
Okay, can I ask the next question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Mr. Bolden, right now so many countries are trying to participate in space exploration, and it's not secret that any country trying to find out an own place and take competitive advantages to investigate something new or to propose new commercial opportunities for other and for humanity as well. How do you think for a country like Kazakhstan with a small population and limited budget, which is the best way to show off own experience and to take an appropriate place in a competitor challenge?
All right, that's going to be a bit difficult, but the question was, there are many countries that are, like all of the countries around the world are trying to explore space now, and every country is trying to find its own kind of like unique places, as far as I got it, in the space exploration. And in this context, for a country like Kazakhstan with small population and limited budget, what do you think would be the best way to show off experience in space exploration and to offer that for offer this for human race, I guess?
Yeah. Sergey, when I first read your question, I thought to myself how curious that you would ask, being from the country from where today all human journeys into space begin. Because for Americans since 2003, all of our astronauts who have been working on the International Space Station have launched from Baikonur. They're in Kazakhstan. It's not something that makes Americans very happy, because we would like to have our own launch capability. But for the last 17 years, American astronauts have traveled to Kazakhstan to get to space. So that's one way that Kazakhstan is already intimately involved in the exploration of our universe. The other thing is, as we were talking earlier to Medina, that Kazakhstan can do is try to find a way for the government to support their private industries and small companies, large companies, all of which have contributions to make, whether it's in pharmaceuticals research. If you look at what's going on today across the globe, everybody on this call is being impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Not a single person on the call today doesn't know about it and is not being impacted by it in some way. And all of us, by uniting and trying to find a cure for one thing, but most importantly, trying to find a vaccine. There's a lot of research that goes on the International Space Station today among many nations, some large, some small. But there are ways for countries like Kazakhstan to do experiments in low Earth orbit. There will be commercial capability to do experiments in the years ahead. And I would say for Kazakh industry, through the support of the government, to try to find a way to get involved with the research that's going on right now on the International Space Station, but within the next few years on orbiting commercial platforms. I think that will be the key for Kazakhstan to become a critical participant in the research that's going on to make the world better. If you look at another thing that's sort of minor, but astronauts and cosmonauts on the International Space Station today are working with an experiment on plant growth, where we're actually growing, it's called veggie, and they have actually grown lettuce and small, what I call cherry tomatoes and beans, and they're edible. So the astronauts are actually able to grow food on the International Space Station that they can use to feed themselves. And the techniques that they're using on the space station are some of the techniques that we're trying to see whether they would make food growth better here on Earth. Whether you're talking about hydroponics, where you just fertilize or the plants with spraying fluid on the roots, or other kinds of methods. So there are things that can be done.
Great. Yeah,
Okay,
Charles. I think we don't hear you. Okay. Charles, I have a question. Do you hear me?
I hear you. I did not hear
yeah.
Sergey, but Den and you giving me his questions, that worked well.
Okay, Charles, did you have time when you felt that you cannot do something or you cannot achieve something and you almost wanted to give up, but then you did it? Who or what influenced you in that case, and how? If you had this case.
I am somewhat embarrassed to tell you, I have lots of cases, and I'll go all the way back to when I first started flying airplanes. I mentioned earlier in response, I think it was to one of Medina's questions, I never dreamed of being an astronaut. But over time, I never dreamed of flying airplanes either. But I went to flight school and I learned how to fly, but I found that one of the things I was very uncomfortable doing was flying what we call formation. And anybody who's ever seen the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds or any country's flight demonstration teams, you have two planes that are flying really close, sometimes with wing overlap and everything. Most pilots want to be Blue Angels, and so they want to be doing that kind of stuff. I found that I was very uncomfortable doing that when I started my flight training, and I was very poor at it, and I was almost ready to quit. But I had one of my friends from the Naval Academy, who was a year ahead of me, was a flight instructor, and he asked if he could come over and fly with me a couple of times. He tried to find out what was going on, and he found out that I was afraid. I was just literally afraid of being that close to another airplane. And so over a couple of flights, he talked to me and he gradually he took the airplane and flew it, and we flew around, and then gradually he said, okay, put your hand on the stick and just follow me through. And I did that. And over the course of one flight, he helped me to get rid of my fear of flying formation. And later I loved doing that. And the rest of my career I did. The second thing that you may be surprised, about 6 months prior to my very first flight, STS-61C on Columbia, we were training in 1985, 86, and we were about 6 months away from flight. And as the pilot, you have huge responsibility for almost all the systems on the Space Shuttle. And I was really struggling with the electrical system because it's very complex. It's quadruply redundant. And I remember telling my commander, Hoot Gibson, that I didn't think I was ever going to learn all this stuff. And I was really worried. And Hoot kind of patted me on the shoulder and he said, hey, don't worry about it. All of us have been here before. It's just very complex. Hang in there, keep studying. And I can guarantee you within a few days, a few weeks, if not days, all of a sudden the light bulb's going to go off. And he was absolutely right. As I was telling Aziza, keep studying really hard, work really hard at it, and ask people for help. sooner or later it will all come to you. And so he was absolutely right. About 6 months out, all of a sudden the light bulb went off, and I became relatively good at doing what I did as first the pilot and then commander twice on the Space Shuttle.
It's great. Thank you for sharing your experience. Charles, do you hear me? Charles?
I hear you, yes.
Great, good. Next question. What are the 3 main questions or challenges in which you are interested, but you don't have it yet?
The 3 main challenges for for traveling to deep space?
No, anything. I mean, questions or challenges in which you are interested, but you don't have answers or solutions yet.
Yeah, well, I think since we're talking about space and exploration, and my big desire is to see humans get to Mars, among the challenges that we don't have all the answers yet, one of them that we're working pretty well on is how do we enable humans to survive the increased radiation environment in traveling outside Earth's magnetosphere to a place like Mars. We will, when we go back to the moon here in the next few years, we'll have an opportunity to live for longer and longer periods of time in lunar orbit and on the surface of the moon. So we'll be exposed to to radiation outside our magnetosphere, and that'll give us some hints. We think we understand it, and we think we have ways to shield humans, but only time will tell, and actual real experience. So that's one, is how to deal with radiation. The other is how do we deal with what's called entry, descent, and landing? How do you get large spacecraft? How do you get large payloads on the surface of a planet like Mars that has a relatively thin atmosphere, so that it's really hard to use the atmosphere to decelerate the vehicle to a speed that's slow enough to safely land on the planet. You can use parachutes to a certain extent, but parachutes don't have the effect that they do here on Earth with a really big atmosphere. So entry, descent, and landing. How do we get large payloads, large cargo and landers onto the surface of Mars safely when we finally send humans there? And then I think we talked about one of the other things. Again, I think it was Medina who asked the question, how do we deal with the psychological impact of long-term space flight away from planet Earth, where communications becomes increasingly difficult in terms of time delays? How does the human brain, or how does the human psyche deal with that kind of isolation and that kind of separation from family and loved ones? So those are 3 of the many things that we're looking at.
Great, thank you. We have Arman here. Arman, are you here? Arman Kashkibekov.
Yes, hello. Do you
Hi,
hear
Arman.
me?
I don't hear you, but go ahead and ask your question. They'll relay it.
Okay.
Arman, can you present yourself, please, also?
Yes, my name is Arman Kashkimbekov, and by the way, I studied in America at Vanderbilt University, did my master's there, and then came back. For the past 5 years. I'm engaged with the renewable energy and sustainable development of the country, and currently heading sustainable development at UNDP Kazakhstan. So my question, of course, first is quite obvious, coming from this area. From your point of view, Mr. Bolden, what's the connection in mankind using currently in the short-term future renewable energy sources, coming some of them from space as the sunlight, so that our development and economic policy and social harmony can be present and secure sustainable development of Kazakhstan and of the Earth as the whole? You have been in orbit many times, so definitely you know how it works. So what's your view on that?
So this is Arman Kashkimbekov. His question is about how, in general, mankind could use sustainable energy including solar energy and other sources. And Kazakhstan is also trying to develop in this direction. So as a person who has been in orbit, what is your view on that?
Arman, I don't know if you were on the net earlier when I talked about a program that NASA and the U.S. Agency for International Development collaborate on called Severe. But Severe is exactly geared toward doing what you do as your life's work in UN sustainable development. We're looking for ways to increase crop output, to help people do water resources management better, to utilize the resources that we have to make our planet more sustainable. We're looking at alternative forms of energy that are non-petroleum based. When we talk about going to Mars, we're looking at, for example, we're looking at nuclear forms of nuclear propulsion or ion propulsion so that we don't have to use organic propellants or petroleum-based propellants. Those are some of the kinds of things we're doing. So even in aeronautics, with dealing with airplanes, NASA's aeronautics division is working on an all-electric airplane that would use solar cells to provide the power for the airplane. We're looking at using organic fuels instead of using petroleum-based jet fuel. We'll use a jet fuel that may be produced from algae or from some other source. So we're pretty busy looking at alternative forms of energy, looking at putting solar farms on the lunar surface so that we can then transmit the energy back to Earth using microwave or laser, who knows what. So those kinds of things are actually in development now between or among NASA and our international partners.
Thank you very much. And my second question is from my personal interest, because I'm not in the area of cosmos or space, but sometimes you see different movies, documentaries about the other side of the moon. So the hidden one, which mankind doesn't see. So my question is, have you, what's your information? What's the moon about? Why we are trying to conquer Mars while moon is still unexplored? Visible side, the other side of the moon, how is it there? What information do you have? And finally, as a result of my question, as a follow-up, when the contact will happen of those guys that live on other planets and ourselves? What's your view on that? Thank you.
So the question is about that we see many documentaries about the backside of the moon, the one that humanity cannot see from the Earth, and why do we keep trying to reach Mars while there is so much unexplored on the moon yet? So what is your view on the moon? And as a follow-up, what is that the moon to the, I couldn't really get it, but I think to the to those who live in the other planets, what is that like?
I think I understand the premise of Arman's question. You know, several things we do know about the moon. We know that the moon has no atmosphere. We know that humans cannot live sustainably on the moon. We don't think we can grow anything there. We believe that there is sufficient quantity of water ice on the moon, but what we don't know right now is how much there is and how easy it's going to be to get that water ice and convert it into oxygen and hydrogen that we can use for propellant, the way that many people believe. We think there may be what here on Earth we call strategic minerals. There are minerals that are very valuable that can be used for propulsion or for material as the basis for very strong materials. Things like molybdenum and titanium that are very hard to get here on Earth. Some people believe we may find in great quantities on the moon, but we don't know. What we do know about Mars is that it has sufficient quantities of water in the Martian regolith. It has some oxygen in its thin atmosphere, and we have an experiment that's going to go up on the next rover here, the end of this year, Persistence, an experiment that's called MOXIE, that's going to actually extract carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere and try to dissociate it into its constituent pieces and parts. So we'll get oxygen out of the carbon dioxide Mars atmosphere. Those are things that we can't do on the moon because it's not there. So the reason we need to go to Mars as opposed to the moon is because we think that life can be sustained on Mars if life is not still there. We believe that life may have once existed there, and it may in fact be there now. I don't think anybody entertains the fact that there, or the idea that there may be life on the moon, or there ever was life on the moon. He asked also about the far side of the moon. I think my science friends tell me, my planetary science friends tell me, it's not the dark side, it's not the other side, it's the far side of the moon. And the reason we go to the far side of the moon, where our friends the Chinese are right now, is because that's one of the places that we think are some of the larger deposits of water ice in the south pole of the moon. So lots of hope that research and experimentation and exploration on the far side of the moon will produce some of this water ice that we think is there, and enable us to extract minerals and material that will help us to go farther into the solar system.
And yeah, Charles, and there was one more question because of the connection is not good. So he said, Arman asked you when we will have a connection, contact with a foreign. What do you think, in your opinion?
When will we have commercial capabilities?
No, when we will have contact, when we will have connection or first contact with the foreign creatures. UFO.
Oh, well, that's a great question, and I don't think anybody.
He has Arman,
yeah, I'm not sure. I, for one, don't think we're going to find intelligent life even when we get to Mars. There may very well be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. So far, we've seen no indication that it exists in our solar system right now. So it may be in a distant galaxy or a distant solar system, but I think it's not going to be in our lifetime when we encounter intelligent life. I hope so, but I don't think that's really going to happen. I think they'll have to come to us. We don't have the capability to get to them yet because of our limitations on travel, both in time and distance.
I see. Artur?
Okay, hello. Can you hear me? Mr. Bolden?
Your phone is too close, Artur.
Okay. My name is Artur, and I'm an amateur astronomer. And I have two projects called Astronomical Tours and School of Astronomy for Children in Nur-Sultan. And my first question about the moon. NASA recently announced a lunar crater radio telescope on the far side of the moon. And what do you think, how will this project be done? By Artemis or by separate launch, any project? It's very interesting.
Arturo, I don't know how NASA plans to do it, but I think given the international interest in placing large telescopes on the lunar surface, particularly on the far side of the moon, I think it's actually going to be international collaboration and possibly led by some of the commercial, private companies that have now won contracts from NASA to build lunar landers. And I think that's actually going to be the way we're going to implement it. We'll take the components for the telescope through a number of commercial landers, sort of like, how SpaceX and Northrop today and our Russians take components of things to the International Space Station piece by piece, and then we assemble them on station. I think it'll be the same thing on the surface of the moon. We'll utilize international partners, we'll utilize commercial entities, and even academia, colleges and universities that will contract for flights to the moon and then down to the lunar surface. And I think it's going to be an international collaboration that will include industry, governments, and academia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bolden. And second question is, how did the first space flight affected to you? How did it change your mind or your outlook on life? What did it change?
My first flight to space was like all four of my flights to space. They changed my perspective on planet Earth. I was always a person of faith, so I don't think I changed my faith as a practicing Christian. That wasn't changed. I think my faith may have become stronger as a result of having an opportunity to look at our universe from the vantage point of orbiting Earth. But your perspective on the planet, how beautiful it is, how fragile it looks, and the critical role that we as human beings play in sustaining this planet. Armand, who was on a little bit earlier and asked the question, his life is spent right now in trying to sustain this planet on which we live. And I think more of us need to be like Armand and his colleagues, who look at ways that we can clean up our planet and preserve it, rather than ways that we can go to some other place in the solar system as an alternative to life here on Earth. Life here on Earth, this is the only planet that humanity knows we can survive on for long periods of time. So I think the challenge for us is to figure out how to clean up this planet, how to get it back to a point where life is sustainable for generations and generations to come, as we explore deeper into the solar system and try to use the lessons we learn here on Earth to preserve other places in the solar system, as well as use lessons we learned in other places in the solar system like Mars to make life better here on the planet.
Great, thanks to you, Mr. Bolden. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Charles,
yes.
Do you have some?
Do I have questions?
Yeah. Maybe you have some questions.
No, not really. I've been enjoying the questions that have come in from your audience. I was wondering if is Armand, I'm not sure I pronounce it correctly, but you had one other person who was head of engineering design at the National Space Center. Is he on?
Yes, I'm here.
Because Armand asked his question provided beforehand was essentially the same as one that Medina asked earlier about how did NASA, how did we help SpaceX in the development of Falcon rockets, and how could the Kazakh government attract startups to the space industry? Hopefully I answered his question in answering Medina's, but if I did not, then please ask him to clarify it, and I'll try to ask it in the time that we have remaining. Do you have any other students that have questions?
Sure.
Yep, it's my turn now. Jalin, I'll be asking just one question.
Okay, was that excuse me, I'm sorry, Den. Was that a mine that just flashed up?
Yeah. Was him.
Yeah, that's all right. Go ahead, Den.
So yeah, my question is, in your opinion, what is the next step for manned missions after Moon and Mars? So now we're sending manned missions to Mars. What is the next step within the next couple of centuries?
Oh, great. there is one organization, and I apologize for not remembering their name, but they have a project that Dr. Mae Jemison is overseeing right now called the 100-Year Starship. And they're actually looking for ideas, looking for people to stretch their imaginations and figure out how we get to another galaxy. You know, how do we make it possible to leave this solar system and even leave our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and travel to an adjacent galaxy somewhere? That's going to take unbelievably different types of propulsion, and it may even bring in science fiction-y kinds of things like going through time warps and other things that may not even be possible, but today are items in science fiction. So unfortunately, I don't think in our lifetime we're going to see travel much farther than Mars for humans. And the primary reason is, so far, we don't think that there is a way to make it sustainable for human beings. You could go to Europa, one of the large moons of Jupiter, where we think life may exist under the ice in the ocean of Europa, or maybe even under the ice on a moon of Saturn called Titan. But we just don't know that it's, that we can get there, or that once we get there, human beings could sustain life. Europa, the problem is the radiation environment around the planet Jupiter, between Europa and Jupiter, is so extreme that even robotic vehicles won't last very long. So we know humans could not survive.
Thank you very much for your answer. Jalin?
Okay. Hello, Mr. Bolden. Can you hear me now? All right, can you hear me?
And I can't hear him, but have him ask his question and then relay again.
Oh, okay. So my name is Jalin. I'm an incoming freshman at the University of California at San Diego. I'm going to study computer science. I'm a space enthusiast, and I'm also an alumni of the United Space Corps in 2018. So my first question is, so as it is well known,
Did we just lose him?
Was that Jalin?
Yep.
Jalin, ask your question in the chat, please.
Did he get his question in?
No, we lost him.
Okay.
Okay. Jalin, ask your question in the chat, please. Aziza, you wanted to ask a question. Aziza, we don't hear you. Guys, next. Okay, we hear you.
What was your parents?
What was
Repeat, please, Aziza.
That's your first.
Did one of you hear it? It was clipped. I think she has something.
Aziza, can you repeat, please?
My parents.
Aziza, unfortunately, we don't hear you. Can you write, please, in the chat? You can write in the chat.
What was your
Aziza, you can write your question in a blue box. This is a chat.
Dorian, meanwhile, why don't we move to the next speaker?
What was your pet?
Oh, what was my parents feeling when I had my first space flight?
Yeah,
I do hear you. Aziza, unfortunately, when I flew my first space shuttle mission, my father had already passed. My father did not live to see me become a NASA astronaut. He lived to see me become a test pilot, and he was at my graduation, but we lost him shortly. In fact, we lost him shortly before I became a test pilot, but he knew I was going to do that. My mother lived throughout my time as a NASA astronaut, and she actually went to every one of my launches. She was very nervous, afraid maybe, and always asked me when was I going to get a real job.
So she didn't consider this seriously, your job?
She considered it very seriously, but she did not. My mother was very proud. She was a librarian. She had been a librarian in elementary school level, intermediate school, and high school before she retired. And I had actually been one of her library assistants when I was in junior high school or middle school. But she was dedicated to students, and she was very proud, I'm certain, of me being an astronaut, but she was not very comfortable with my going to space. She was afraid all the time.
Next, please, guys.
Yeah, Rasul?
Rasul? Yeah, Rasul?
Sure.
Okay.
Do we have another Arman here?
Yes, I'm
Arman.
here. I'm here.
Can you ask question?
Yes. Mr. Bolden, do you hear me? Hello, Mr. Bolden. Do you hear me? Okay, no worries. I can spell my question here then, and if you can forward it to Mr. Bolden, it will be great. Okay.
Here you go.
Yeah, my name is Arman Bikimbaev. I'm head of engineering design office in the Galam company. It's the company who is responsible for building satellites in the Kazakhstan. So the question that Madina asked, it actually, yes, it was my question. I just wanted to ask Madina to raise this question to you because I wasn't sure if it will be enough time for the question. But you fully answered it, so it's okay. The only thing I wanted to just clarify, so the government, to support development innovations in the space, government should invest in the young startup companies. That's what was the conclusion of your answer, I think. If it's not, please correct me. And another question is, so it's time when all the countries, most of the countries, are already in space, but the space juridical aspects still not settled yet. So, for example, if the moon will be the base for the new minerals, minerals research. In this case, what will be the juridical law? How to use this space on the moon? If it will be the property of whole humanity, or it will be again divided by countries by countries? The same for the space around the Earth, for example. It's a lot of satellites already there, and it coming more and more. And if it would never be the law saying that it's okay to send like 50 satellites on orbit by one company and not like 2,000 of them or 5,000 of them. And this can be decided on the side of like whole humanity governmental organization like UN, United Nations. So what's your opinion about that? When this kind of questions will be settled, will be started to discuss? Thank you very much.
So a brief summary of the question. So the space exploration is going on, but the juridical, the legislative issue of this is not yet established. And for example, if we decide to make Moon our property, whose property is it going to become? One country's, one company, or entire humanity's? And similarly for the satellites orbiting around Earth. And what is your opinion? When do you think these questions will be established, and by what entity, like UN or maybe something else?
Yeah, Aman, I think you probably are aware that there, the Outer Space Treaty, and I forget when it was originated and signed, and unfortunately, I don't think the U.S. is a signatory to the Outer Space Treaty. But the Outer Space Treaty says that no single nation can lay claim to something like the moon or an asteroid or some other body in the solar system or in the universe. Here in the United States, our Congress and the president have signed a couple of bills that say that private companies can lay claim to resources that come from, an asteroid or some other near-Earth object, or maybe even the moon. I'm not, I think the UN will probably be where the final arbitration is made. One of the largest growing areas of legal study today is space law, because there are very few actual laws on the books about how people deal with commerce in space. So early on, we actually followed maritime law when humans started going into space. But there is no universally accepted governing body right now. The UN would, in my mind, would obviously be that place. There is a committee called the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UNCOPUOS, and UNCOPUOS today has hearings and meetings and deliberations on a lot of the questions you ask about who has control over assets or who has control over resources that come from someplace other than Earth. But today, international law says that no one nation can lay claim to, to a whole body that is encountered in space. And I think that's the way it should be. I don't think any nation should be able to claim an asteroid or the moon or anything else as their own.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with you.
Can you ask Armand, is it his birthday today? I noticed the birthday, big birthday card behind him that looks like maybe he got that from one of his kids. Is it your birthday today?
No, it's not my birthday. No, it's just the present of my boy. It was this year. That's why it's still there. I just never take it out.
Charles, do you hear me? It's Doran.
I hear you, Doran.
Yeah. There are questions from Facebook and internet
sure.
coming to us. Okay, so this is a question from Manap. How developing countries such as Kazakhstan or other countries can contribute on space missions? For example, especially Artemis program.
For developing nations like Afghanistan, I think that their participation,
like Kazakhstan,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Afghanistan. But as we were talking earlier about Kazakhstan, but it would be the same thing for any developing nation. I think the critical thing for them initially is to find a partner, find a partner nation where they can. Here in America, we have a program for industry that we call the mentor protege program, where a big company sort of adopts a small company that doesn't have experience in working with government and kind of takes them by the hand and helps them to develop experiments or projects or products that can be marketed to the government for use. So I would say a developing country, it would be good if they could partner with an already established spacefaring country. NASA, for example, really tries to reach out to developing countries. We have today more than 800 formal technical agreements with more than 120 countries around the world. And Kazakhstan happens to be one of those countries. And those agreements could be anything from basic fundamental STEM education all the way up through aeronautics and science or human spaceflight. Now, right now, the human spaceflight part is generally with the larger nations, the more experienced spacefaring nations. But I would say for a country like Kazakhstan, you probably have a pharmaceuticals industry or a materials processing industry where you build material that goes into airplanes or rockets. And those companies and those industries and universities in Kazakhstan should partner with American universities. MIT is MIT, Stanford, Harvard, American universities that have a long time experience in space flight and exploration to form partnerships. I would say that's the best way to get involved.
Great. We have more questions. Can you ask? Yes. From internet, from Facebook.
Sure.
From Instagram. Yeah. So this is a question from Dinara Aydarbekova. Mr. Bolden, when you were in space, did you see something unusual?
Do you see something unusual? Interestingly, you see lots of things unusual. Unfortunately, you never saw anything. I never saw anything that made me think that there was life around my spacecraft. You see things, for example, when we were flying on the Space Shuttle, because the very aft end of the shuttle, what we call where the main engines are attached to the shuttle, it gets very, very cold when the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen are flowing in to fuel the spacecraft for launch. And it gets so cold in a very humid environment like the Kennedy Space Center that you get, sheets of ice that are pretty thick on the aft end of the shuttle. And when you get to space, it goes through a process called sublimation, where it goes from solid directly to gas. It doesn't melt, but it goes from the solid state to gas, and chunks of ice frequently break off the back of the shuttle, and they start floating around, and all of a sudden you see these big things floating out around the spacecraft. You take pictures of it or you put a camera on it so that the people on the ground can analyze what it is, and it almost always turns out to be something that we really understand what it is. But those are probably the most unusual things we see. There's some really exciting, unusual scenes like lightning down on Earth viewed from space, from the vantage point of space. And lightning was one of my favorite natural events, where you see lightning that dances from cloud top to cloud top, or from cloud to ground, or every once in a while you'd actually see lightning travel from the ground up to a cloud. And that was a very spectacular light show. And sometimes traveling over areas like the Amazon region, the Amazon jungle in South America, or over the deserts of Africa, you would see these lightning shows that you could, let your mind run, and it was almost like you were watching a light show that had a symphony orchestra behind it, and the light, was dancing around to the music from the symphony orchestra. So that's one of the a natural phenomena that you see, that sometimes we understand, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, great. A lot of emotions, yeah. So, Charles, and people also, what are your favorite books?
I hate to admit it, I'm not a big reader of hard books, but I am a voracious listener of what we call audible books. So yeah. I have several, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 books in my Audible collection, and some of my favorite, my favorite is The Martian, and I've actually listened to that one several times. I also love On Becoming by First Lady Michelle Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, and so there are a number of books that I would say I'd recommend to anybody, but those would be two of my favorite.
Great, thank you. And more questions also from people.
Dorian, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but that would be a bit unfair to those students here who
No,
were
there are
losing their
questions. There are
connection.
questions from Facebook. There are questions from Facebook.
But
we have also
Yaroslav and Jalin haven't asked any questions yet, so let them ask
Sure,
one question.
Let's go.
Yaroslav?
We didn't hear you.
Hello, Mr. Bolden. Can you hear me?
But
Mr.
go ahead and ask.
So, can you hear me now?
Go on, we'll repeat your question.
Okay. So, and I'm interested in space technologies, and if the situation with COVID will be good this summer, I will go to the Johnson Space Center at Houston with the USS program. And my question is, can you describe your NASA administrator experience, features of this position and experience you gained, and what you understood during your administration time? Yes, that's my question.
All right, Mr. Bolden, Yaroslav's question was. Yaroslav, can you please turn off your mic? So his question was, can you please describe your NASA administrator experience, what you learned, what you felt there, and what changes did it bring to you?
Well, you know, I served as the NASA administrator for almost 8 years, both terms with President Obama, and it was quite an honor and quite exciting and quite challenging. I found that, first of all, I was not very well prepared for what would come. I technically, you know, I had the background, but I had never been in a political environment like Washington, D.C. and like government. So I found I had to learn how do you maneuver through the political landscape? How do you find ways to work effectively with Congress and with the administration? Because you're actually, NASA is a part of the executive branch of our three-part government. We have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And NASA actually belongs to the president. It's a part of the executive branch. And but the money comes from the legislative branch. So you have to figure out how you work effectively with both the House and the Senate, Democratic, Republican, and Independent. And I think I learned that one of the things I had to do effectively as the administrator of NASA was to become a very good storyteller, which meant I had to be able to go in and explain the programs that we felt NASA should get funded, if we were going to have any chance at all that Congress would fund them, or that the president would approve them to be proposed, because every program that NASA did was in a way, it was the president's program, since we were a part of his administration. My biggest challenge was people, and that's always the case. I spent 34 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, and there my biggest challenge was people. How do you take care of your people and make sure that they are safe, that they feel like they're making a valuable contribution, and so my job as the NASA administrator was sort of to act as an umbrella over the organization, so that the criticism and other kinds of things that would come from outside the agency, whether it be from Congress or every once in a while from the administration, that my workforce would be shielded from that, and that they could really focus on their work. So those were some of the challenges that I had. But again, extremely enjoyable, quite an honor to serve as the NASA administrator. and a real special honor to serve for President Obama.
All right. For the name, Mr. Bolden, I'm the last year, so the question I wanted to ask you about high school career and college career was, so because of the governmental confidentiality policy at NASA and other aerospace agencies, a lot of international students are not allowed to work at such companies. So when will those companies allow those international students to work at those companies? Because there's a bunch of internationals around the world who want to work there but can't. That's my question. Dimash, did you get it?
Yes, I did. I think I do have your question here. So, Gauhar, I will repeat this question now because I think no one was actually hearing Jalin, but I kind of have this question here. Jalin's question was about that entities like organizations like NASA are often restricted from international students and international members to get an internship or any related experience there. So what would you advise to international students to do to get into there, or maybe to do instead?
Jolene, it's today, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's extremely difficult for anyone to get into the United States to do anything, but we won't be here forever. And NASA has now a program that is authorized by Congress and the State Department called the International Intern Program. And, you know, as a student, if you can be sponsored by your home country, and the country itself selects you, NASA doesn't select you, but they can sponsor you to come to apply for the International Intern Program, and that will give you an opportunity to come to one of the NASA centers in the United States and work for anywhere from a few weeks to maybe a few months, where you get an opportunity to work alongside NASA scientists and engineers and see how we do things before you go back to your country. One of the largest countries to participate today is the country of Jordan. And over the years, Jordan has actually had, I think, 16 international interns. So unfortunately, you know, if you're from a country like Iran, it's probably going to be very, very, very difficult to get into the program. But most countries around the world that have satisfactory diplomatic relationships with the United States, if your country is willing to sponsor you and pay for it, you should be able to apply for the International Intern Program. So I would go to the NASA website and look up intern, and then further look up international intern to get all the information on how you apply.
Great, thank you, Mr.
Great opportunity. Yes, there are questions from internet. What materials do you recommend about space and rockets?
If you're asking what do I recommend someone study if they're interested, I would say any math and science, because actually there is a need for people with expertise in almost every area of every technical area imaginable. NASA does work in aeronautics. We do work in the four big areas of science: earth science, planetary science, astrophysics, you know, and what did I say? Planetary science? I think I did. But and then we also do a lot of work in technology development. So looking at the types of materials that are going to be needed, high temperature materials that can withstand re-entry heating when coming back to Earth from places like Mars and the Moon. Those are all kinds of areas that I would say a student who's going to go to college and then go on and get an advanced degree would be well served by looking at propulsion areas and particularly nuclear propulsion and alternative forms of propulsion other than carbon-based or petroleum-based propulsion.
Thank you. Arthur. Yeah. Charles, do you have time?
We can probably do maybe two more questions.
Okay, great.
I have a question, Mr. Bolden. In your opinion, what human traits, qualities, and values are most important for achieving goals or for to become a great leader or a big spread of sphere?
Yeah, Arturo, let me, I think the most important characteristic for an individual,
Yes.
no matter what line of work they're interested in, would be to develop the characteristic of integrity. Honesty and integrity. It is most important, and it's the one thing that that nobody else can give you. You're born with integrity. It's God-given, and the only person who can take it from you is you. Nobody else can make you lie. Nobody else can make you try to deceive people. So I would say that's characteristic number one. Always be someone that people can trust and believe. Do not be afraid of bringing bad news. People, we're finding today here in the United States, as we battle with the COVID crisis, the American public, nobody likes bad news, but the American public can deal with bad news. They just want honesty, and they want to know, if we're going to have to struggle through something, I want to know that I'm going to have to struggle through it, and I want to know that somebody has a plan for getting through that. I think I mentioned before, I spent 34 years on active duty as a Marine, and I got to love Marines. They're absolutely phenomenal because they will do anything you ask them to do, no matter how difficult, as long as they trust you. And if you tell them, hey, this is going to be a really bad mission we've got to go do, and some of us may not come back, they're okay with that, because they know that you're going to do everything you can to take care of them and try your best to make sure they get back. So number one thing is integrity. The other thing I would say, take care of your people. If you're in a job that has other people who are working with or around you, take care of them, and they'll take care of you. Don't worry about yourself. People who trust you and believe in you will take care of you. So take care of your people. That's the other thing. Don't forget your family. They love you and they care for you. So don't forget them at all. Spend time with them. And then I guess, I could keep going, but another characteristic would be one that sometimes people take as weakness, but it's called empathy. And it is the ability to feel for other people, to try to understand what other people are going through. Again, I go back to what we're doing today with COVID. It's really, really, really important for us to be empathetic toward other people. Most of us are not suffering. Most of us are not sick or have not been sick, but we have to empathize with people who are going through that now. And we have to empathize with families who are watching their loved ones just die right in front of them, and they can't even get to them to be with them in a time of need. So those are just a couple of things. But thanks very much for asking that question. That's an awesome question.
Thanks to you, Mr. Bolden, for these great advices. Thank you.
Thanks, Arturo. Maybe one last question if we can.
Margina?
Okay, if I
Hi,
can.
Medina. Good to see you again. I'm sorry. I wish I could hear you.
Okay, my last question is, how do you imagine the future of astronautics by the end of the 21st century?
Mr. Bolden, the question is, how do you imagine the future of astronautics by the end of the 21st century?
Boy, I don't know that I can imagine, Medina, but let me tell you where I hope we are. And I hope we're there long before the end of the 21st century, because I think technically a lot of these things that I want to see are well within our grasp. Let me come back to Earth first. I really would love to see us be able to further develop communications methods like laser communications, that allow us to get much more data over a very short period of time from point A to point B. NASA has done some experimentation with laser communications between the moon and Earth, and it works incredibly well because what light does is we can put large packets of data into a lot of streams of light that come down simultaneously. And so it gives you the false impression that you're actually talking, light is traveling faster than it really is. It's still traveling at the speed of light, but you're packing so much data into each of those streams of light. So that's one of the things that I would like to see us get better and better and better at. Laser communications. I've heard people talk about quantum communications. I don't have any knowledge about it at all, but it sounds good. So anything that enables us to communicate quicker or more efficiently among ourselves. I really am looking forward to us developing alternative forms of propulsion that enable us to go faster and faster and faster. A friend of mine with whom I flew twice, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, has in development a fusion rocket that's called, or an ion rocket that's called Vasimer. Anybody who saw the movie The Martian, or whatever it's called in your country, when the Chinese spacecraft went to save Mark Watney, they actually were using Vasimer engines, and that was what enabled them to travel so fast. So alternative forms of propulsion. I would love to see us further develop low Earth orbit such that commercial entities, non-governmental entities, control the operation in low Earth orbit for both commerce and the good of humanity. So those are just a few of the things, Medina. I could go on and on and on and on, but I won't bore you there. So, but let me say, because I've got to go, I want to thank all of you. Doran, thanks so much for the idea, and Den for you and everybody else on the team. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to meet with all these people, and Gawker for your interpretation, although I didn't get to hear any of it, but it seems like it worked really well. But it's been a pleasure for me to work with you all today, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Oh, really? So great. Thank you very much, Mr. Bolden. And it's really incredible that you could spend time with us and share your knowledge. And I think a lot of professionals and the young people in Kazakhstan and different countries also are inspired by your experience. They would pursue the professional their ways in innovation, technology, and space. Thank you, Mr. Bolden.
Thank you all very much, and have a great day and a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, everybody, stay healthy.
And you too,
Thank you,
Mr. Bolden.
Thank you.
Yeah, we wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Association of Bolshak, the Center for to U.S. of Embassy in Kazakhstan, and to Gauhar Moikenova, he's a translator, and to Charlzom Bolden. Guys, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you, guys.